At this point, it was nearly 2 years ago when the Kresk declared war on the Vene Republic. The Vene were a young race to the galaxy, one that was initially unfamiliar with its true nature, that being that the question of right and wrong is only in contest between equals in power. The strong will do what they will, the weak can only suffer what they must. This was the galaxy's golden rule, its only true rule. Sure, the Galactic Concord had a host of others, but they were mere lip service. It was easy to fabricate an excuse for breaking any one of them, if an empire even wished to go that far. When the Kresk declared war on the Vene, they had not. They didn't bother trying to justify their actions, disinterested in even the attempt to pay lip service to the Concord's rules and regulations. They weren't the first. It had long been known that those rules only applied to the weak, and the Kresk weren't weak. Why bother paying lip service when the energy is better served elsewhere? And so they invaded the Vene, whose colonies, and especially their cradle system, held resources the Kresk wanted. What resources? We didn't really know, but the Kresk were nearing overpopulation in their systems. The planets themselves, which by cosmic coincidence suited Kresk biology as readily as the Vene's, may have been enough. The Vene's representative in the Concord naturally railed against this, as often as was possible. No justifiable reason was given by the Kresk after all, so our laws were quite clear. The Concord should come together to resist this unjust invasion. However, wars are expensive. Furthermore, wars for the sake of others, especially those with as little influence as the Vene, tend to be unpopular with the public. Why intervene when we would gain nothing from it except fomenting dissent at home? So that we would uphold our laws? Since when did that matter to the Concord? A small wrench was thrown into this view when the Kresk offered the Vene terms for peace. That's because the terms included that, along with the complete and unconditional surrender of all of their territories, the Vene would become slaves of the Kresk. It also included a warning that failure to comply would mean the complete annihilation of their species. A war for resources was one thing, but, as far as the galaxy was concerned, slaves weren't a resource that were in short supply. Slaves were actually quite cheap, especially seeing how most physical and intellectual labor could be handled by AI and automated drones and the like. Despite how many were willing to sell themselves or their kin into it to get rid of debts or the like, slaves were merely a status symbol. Demanding an entire species submit itself to slavery? Well, those were terms most species would be unwilling to commit to, meaning the Kresk's true goal was the complete eradication of the Vene. This was obvious to everyone in the galaxy, so I briefly wondered why I was being forced to listen to yet another of the Vene representatives' long-winded rants as I sat in the Concord Assembly chamber. Can the Galactic Concord, meekly sit by and watch as our people, my people, a peaceful people, are ruthlessly exterminated like vermin? The Vene representative shouted. We know, your species is about to be wiped off the face of the galaxy. No one is coming to help you, get over yourselves already. This was the thought running through my mind with each and every breath of my air this doomed individual took. The others seemed to have similar thoughts, as the few whispers heard throughout. The chamber sounded more like groans of complaint than support for the representative's position. The speaker, whose species was some weird cross between a bird and elephant, seemed to agree with those whispers. I could tell this as the Vene representative had continued speaking, but her mic had apparently been cut. The speaker seemed ready to continue on to more important matters. However, as he leaned in to announce as much, something seemed to have caught his eye, causing him to back away and glance to his side. An aide whispered to him, and he soon ignited the light for the chamber to be silent. Ever the followers of the Concord's rules, even the Vene representative, still seemingly in the middle of her speech, stopped shouting into her dead microphone. Suddenly, all eyes turned to someone that no one was expecting, as no one ever did, a human. Mind you that? Humans do not have a place in the assembly of the Galactic Concord, they never had. The reason why this is the case has been lost to time, but despite not having a representative, they do have an envoy, as they call it. This envoy does not speak for all of humanity, as humanity's governments are even more fragmented than the Concords. They don't even speak for their own government, at least whatever government they came from. They are closer to general advisors than anything, and rarely actually participate in the Concord's affairs. Humanity cannot simply sit back and watch the Vene's plight unfold. The envoy shouted into his microphone with such raw emotion that it caused the electronics to screech. That was not a good start. He's far too emotionally invested and not taking stock of reality. Will this assembly merely sit by and watch as an entire species is wiped from the galaxy for no reason at all? Is this assembly nothing more than a gathering of hypocrites? Murmurs started immediately among the Concord's representatives. Just who was this human, whose race didn't even deserve the title of representative? Was he really trying to shame us when his own people had been just as idle? As the murmurs of discontent rose, so too did the Volgotan representative. If the humans wish to aid the Veni, then they are free to do so themselves, he shouted. Throughout the chamber, loud shouts of agreement could be heard. If the humans wanted to fight the Kresk on the Veni's behalf, they were free to do so, or so I had thought initially. However, I happened to notice that as those shouts echoed throughout the gathered representatives, the Volgotan representative flashed a knowing smile. He then glanced at the human envoy and gave his species' equivalent of a wink. Something was off, something that the human was about to make abundantly clear. So seeing as none of the members of this body, are willing to follow its laws and do what is demanded, you will instead foister that responsibility onto us? That you demand of us that we do all that is necessary to aid the Vene in repelling the unjustified genocide of the Kresk? The human envoy shouted to the gathered assembly. Most of the assembly instantly shouted in agreement, even laughing at the envoy, though I did notice there were slightly fewer voices this time. Those few who abstained seemed to have caught on to what I did, that there was something in either the human's or Volgotan's voice or body language that made it seem like a setup. The human envoy smiled, a wide, teeth-baring smile that made the gathered representatives fall silent in an instant. He picked up a device and tapped a few buttons, causing a display to appear in the hall. On the display was the name of every nation or empire that had agreed to the humans' last outburst. Then, as it is now fully understood by humanity, we have the complete and total cooperation of all listed parties to move our ships and fleets through their systems in our effort to aid the Vene, he said. Several of the representatives seemed to be about to retort, but the envoy quickly turned towards the speaker and cut them off. Speaker, is this not exactly what has been stated recorded in public record by those assembled here today? Perhaps because we were absorbed in our own concerns, but none of us had noticed that the speaker had grown a few shades paler since we last paid attention to him. Yes. It is so. The speaker fumbled their words slightly to the shock of no small number of representatives, I'm sure. The human smiled, his fangs flashing to the gathered representatives before sitting down. The speaker then quickly moved on to other subjects and even went so far as to ignore the outright demands of a few of the gathered representatives to return to the question of the Kresk-Veni War and what the humans' involvement in it would mean. Given what followed, I don't blame him for this. Human ships flooded into Veni space from every direction, arriving through the nations whose ambassadors had graciously agreed to let them. Some of these empires, it appeared, wanted to renege on this agreement and attempted to harass the human fleets as they passed, though. After all, when the Kresk ambassador had learned of the stunt humanity had pulled, he became apoplectic and vowed grave consequences for any who allowed the human fleets to pass through their territories, hence the attempt to stop them. But attempt really is the key word. The human fleets moved with eerie speed and grace, often already having repositioned and jumped back into hyperspace before a local force could attempt to confront them, even when they were no more than a light hour or two away. It would prove to be their saving grace. Within a week, Veni space was crawling with human vessels of different sizes and designs. As mentioned, humanity is a fragmented species, and with many of the ship's designs, you could see the different mindsets and doctrines at work. What we were witnessing was a coalition of nations, many of which were often seen exchanging weapons, fire among themselves in previous years. Yet despite this, they had rallied together to come to the defense of a people who they were unaffiliated with, where we had not. The Kresk took this provocation for what it was, and gathered together the largest armada it had ever deployed up to that point. Still, they were no fools. Humanity wasn't exactly a newcomer to the galaxy, but to recent memory they had never been tested. None knew the capabilities of their ships, nor the strength of their warriors, and the Kresk weren't about to strike at the heart of an unknown foe. So they bypassed where humanity's forces were thickest and settled for attacking Rossum II. Though not a major world, it saw enough trade and commerce that it couldn't be called a minor one either. For that reason, there were some human ships guarding the planet, though they were few by comparison. As the sun rose over Rossum II's capital, it ushered in 2 hours of hell that would follow in the skies above. When the Kresk fleet appeared, the human task force patrolling the system quickly began activating their electronic warfare sensors and sending out surveillance drones, activating their defense shielding, what little they would prove to have, and preparing their weapons. They were noticeably outnumbered by their opponent and seemed to be caught out of position, as none had expected the planet to be attacked. The Kresk admiral ordered a general attack, allowing his ships to fire on the nearest available targets, at their discretion as they closed on their enemy. That was when one of the human ships, the UNSS St. John, led by a commander Nevis, would, without orders, turn his lone ship toward the enemy and begin a suicidal charge while firing the ship's main coil gun at the enemy. The projectiles were slow for space, but the Kresk's ship still needed to dodge them. As other ships likewise broke off from the group, still hastily organizing itself around the planet, and began following Nevis's lead, the Kresk soon found their armada being crammed into smaller and smaller corridors. Ironically, it was their ship's own warning systems and their Navy's guidelines that were responsible for this. Having detected the incoming projectiles, the alerts prompted them to move out of the way, sometimes minutes before the projectile actually arrived. This greatly increased the risk of friendly fire, forcing many of the ships to hold fire or risk striking the shields of their allies. Still, the Kresk's cruisers and battleships were nothing to scoff at, and those that could safely do so returned fire with vicious precision. That was when the strangest of things happened. As the first of the Kresk's energy cannons lanced at the lead ship, the one which Nevis commanded, the Kresk saw the ship's shields flicker, typically a sign that they had been breached. And what they thought was an explosion on its outer hull. The ship had been pierced in a single hit, it seemed. But it kept firing, kept accelerating towards them, as though it was unaffected. The admiral of the Kresk was now starting to feel nervous, especially as the first wave of oncoming human ships began reaching a distance where evading their main cannons would prove difficult. Lance after lance was striking them, and yet the human ships seemed to simply ignore it, as though they were invulnerable to the Kresk's weapons. Then one of the humans' coil guns found its mark, and the Kresk's lead ships, KIC Caldvenia, saw its entire bow pulverized in a blinding flash of light. Given the velocity and estimated mass of those weapons, that should not have happened. Now the admiral was really nervous. The situation would only deteriorate further, as whatever the weapon was that the humans had used had the side effect of scrambling their sensors, which were already under constant bombardment from the truly advanced electronic warfare suites the humans were using. The Kresk fleet wasn't blind, but it certainly had blood in its eyes. Then another ship found itself cut in half by another flash of blinding light, as a third was critically damaged from a glancing blow that required two others to pull off, to collect its escape craft. Just when the admiral was thinking the battle couldn't get any worse, it devolved further. The humans proved that they weren't content to simply sit at a distance and snipe it out. Their ships continued charging headlong into the armada, as swarms of drones now harassed the cruisers and battleships. The drones couldn't do any real damage. Most of them didn't even have any weapons at all, but with the sorry state the Kresk sensors were now in, they did plenty. Kresk displays erroneously reported drones as new ships or incoming weapons fire, or mislabeled actual ships as drones as the battle descended into what could only be described as a point-blank brawl. Tell me, have you ever heard of a battleship being mauled by PDCs? its shields and hull peppered by lasers, ball bearings, small caliber chemically propelled projectiles, flares, and even drop pods filled with whatever explosives they had on hand? Of course not, because with this singular absurd exception, such a thing never happens. If a battleship is mauled, it's mauled by the main cannons of another battleship, or at least a cruiser, and yet, that's exactly what happened here. Two of the humans' ships, the UNSS El Musa Orsturb and UNSS Erhaman, pulled up alongside the KIC Inverta and unleashed all of the firepower of their PDCs and whatever else they had on hand into it. The crazy thing? Although the Inverta was at no risk of any serious damage, the bombardment had knocked out most of its sensors and jammed many of its weapons. It wasn't sunk, but it was knocked out of action. This was not unique, but the norm for the battle, as another battleship and cruiser found pieces of their structure erased from existence in yet more flashes of blinding light. It was at this point that the Kresk admiral ordered a retreat. However, he hadn't gone away empty-handed. While Rossum II was still firmly under the Vene's control, he had learned about humanity's ships. It had turned out, much to his surprise, that the main cannons of his ships were too powerful. They lanced straight through the shields and hull of the enemy, boring holes completely through them but doing nothing else. The human ships also appeared to have limited ammunition for their main cannons, as most of the ships had long since stopped firing them despite how devastatingly effective they proved. Their real concerning feature, however? Their electronic warfare suites, which he had to grudgingly admit were top-notch, even better than those of his own flagship by a mile. Still, if that was all the humans had, his armada could win. While the battle had become chaotic, his armada had already managed to sink nearly half of the enemy ships that had charged at them by this point, including the UNSS St. John. So why did he order the retreat? Because of time. More than 2 hours had passed, and from the intelligence he'd been given on the human fleet before the battle, he knew they could quickly reposition. It had taken him too long, and far too many sacrifices to gain this knowledge. And with the current state of the battle, it would take longer still to finish putting the defenders down and attack the planet. That carried a significant risk of reinforcements arriving before the planet was taken, perhaps many, many more. And while he would be better prepared, he'd prefer to fight them on his terms. Unfortunately for him, the future would hold that the Admiral was mistaken in one key aspect. The fleet he faced at Ryasam II was not a fleet. It was not composed of humanity's strongest or most advanced ships, or combat ships at all, really. It was a handful of escorts and supply craft who were there to offer aid to the planet's populace. Given that the state of trade and commerce, Rasam II's main source of goods and revenue, was severely diminished during the war. The ships he had faced were what the humans called tin cans and technicals, the latter being refitted civilian ships, at best. They were not intended for the frontline combat that the Admiral's armada had put them through. They were never intended to maul battleships with PDCs or evaporate cruisers. At least, the humans didn't design them with that in mind. With this bit of future sight in mind, one can guess how the Battle of Urban 7 went for the Kresk when the Admiral put his newfound knowledge to work against what was most definitely a fully prepared human fleet. There is a reason that many historians refer to it as the slaughter of Urban 7. Following the Armada's near-complete annihilation, the war entered a sort of lull. It seemed that humanity was unified in their willingness to defend the Veni, but defend is the key word. However, despite most of their navy now existing as debris that drifted towards Urban's prime, the star that Urban 7 orbits, and the planets they had previously conquered being swiftly retaken by humanity's fleets and troops, the Kresk were not willing to surrender. Many of the human nations wanted to strike at the Kresk, to eliminate both their will and ability to fight. However, those who held this view couldn't necessarily agree on what set of targets best achieved this, resulting in the plurality going to those who simply wished to defend the Veni's borders rather than attack. I am told that, within the humans' version of the Concord, debate over this was quite fierce, with a few sessions ending in violent brawls. Uncivilized, you say? Perhaps. I must admit, I once felt the same myself, but looking back now, I'm envious. Really? Think about it for a moment. We're not talking about mere individuals. These are the representatives of their people. And yet they have such passion, such drive, as to literally put life and limb on the line to merely debate the topic. When was the last time you were so passionate? And I must remind you, this was not for themselves, but the Vene. They fought, figuratively and literally, over how best to defend a people who were not even their own. So, how did the war finally come to an end? Well, it's a bit anticlimactic, I'm afraid. As I stated before, the plurality among the humans held that they would simply defend Veni territory, while the Kresk refused to surrender. Their refusal was not mere pretense either. They didn't refuse to surrender, but stood down. They kept building ships and manning them with whoever they could find, sending them to the front lines as fast as they could. Meanwhile, those who feared the Kresk before no longer did. The Kresk were preoccupied, and while they still had a few good ships, they didn't have many of them. Meaning others weren't willing to give the Kresk the preferential treatment they had before, nor were they afraid of the bellicose threats of retaliation for refusing to do so. Everyone had seen the Kresk's navy being reduced to debris, and when the galaxy learned the truth of what the Kresk fleet had faced at Rayasam II, how a handful of supply ships had fought head-to-head with their armada and forced them to retreat, well, no one feared them now. With 2 battles, the Kresk went from being one of the strongest races in the Concord to one of the weakest, their economy crumbling and their populace being tired of being made into literal cannon fodder. The people revolted. It wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't clean. The bloodbath that would be the overthrow of the Kresk Empire is a tale unto itself, one that the agents of humanity likely played no small part in, even if they deny it to this day. To oversimplify the complexity of the revolt, even in the very beginning, 3 sides emerged as the likely dominant power. There was one general who, at various times, fought for all 8 of them, and none of them resembled the current government of the Kresk. Still, it eventually happened. A dominant power arose, and the Kresk officially surrendered. At the same time, humanity returned to its borders, leaving the Veni to deal with this as they saw fit. I won't deny I was surprised by this. Who puts so many resources into aiding another without gaining anything in return? However, it seems that the gratitude of the Vene was enough, or more likely, I think now, that the entire point had been a demonstration of power. As I mentioned before, prior to the war, humanity was seen by most of the galaxy as an untested power. Put another way, we had forgotten their might. We caught a glimpse of that power in the Kresk-Vene War, but we understood that it was only a glimpse. They had sent plenty of ships, plenty of troops, plenty of supplies, but none of the members among humanity's coalition had sent their best ships, their best troops. We saw exactly what they wanted us to see, the destruction of one of the Concord's most powerful empires by their B team. If humanity was lax in dealing with a power, even the other great empires of the Concord tread lightly around. What might it mean for the galaxy if they were to ever fight seriously? Enjoy another amazing story. Humans are the only species in the galaxy who can bend the rules without breaking them. Those words echoed through the minds of countless beings in the Galactic Empire, most of whom had no idea who had uttered them. But they were about to find out. They would see firsthand how humans could turn bureaucratic absurdity into a weapon, and it all started with a single absurd stunt. Teslan Spusky X, eccentric CEO of Spusky X Interstellar, was not the kind of man who thought things through. His latest idea was, in a word, reckless. He'd been looking for a way to make the next big splash, the one that would turn the company into a household name, or at least into something more than a quirky startup trying to make its way in the crowded interstellar market. His plan? Send a rocket into the restricted quadrant of the galaxy, the same quadrant that had been declared off-limits by the Galactic Empire eons ago. They'd stamped it with a no-entry sign, but for Spuskex, that was just an invitation. He thought it would make for an unforgettable live stream, something the public couldn't ignore. And so, on a day like any other, a rocket launched, soaring into the depths of forbidden space. The crowd watching on screens across the galaxy went wild. They were all there, in front of their screens, eagerly anticipating whatever wild spectacle Teslan had promised. The problem was, Teslan hadn't read the fine print. None of the fine print, really. Galactic law was an ocean of rules, regulations, and archaic edicts that few even bothered to keep track of. After all, who cared about a law passed 9,000 years ago when it was clearly forgotten by the rest of the galaxy? Well, someone did. And they worked at the Department of Galactic Empires, DGE. A few days after the stunt, Teslan was relaxing in his office, reading reports on his profits. His communications console blinked to life, and the screen filled with a face he didn't recognize, a gray-skinned alien with antennae twitching in annoyance. "This is an official communication from the Department of Galactic Empires," the alien said. "You are in violation of Galactic Regulation 477, subsection 4, Clause B, paragraph 13, an ancient decree forbidding any human from entering the restricted quadrant under penalty of immediate imprisonment. Cease all operations and surrender your assets to the Galactic Council." Teslan blinked, his mind scrambling to process the message. "Wait, what? Who? You have violated the law, Mr. Spuskex," the alien continued, unperturbed. "We will send a task force to apprehend you. Your company will be dissolved, your assets liquidated, and..." A pause. "Wait, you're saying because I sent a rocket into some restricted area? A place that's been abandoned for millennia?" "Correct." "Well, that's absurd. What even makes it restricted?" Teslan leaned forward in his chair, intrigued. "What's out there? Some sort of space-time paradox, or a giant spacefaring monster?" The alien didn't respond immediately. The silence grew thick. "That information is classified," it finally said. Teslan grinned. He loved classified information. "Okay," he said, leaning back in his chair. "So you're telling me that this law was passed thousands of years ago, and nobody's bothered to enforce it since. But now, I send a rocket into some forgotten part of space, and suddenly, I'm the bad guy. And you want me to just surrender what? Everything? My entire company? My assets? You realize how big Spuskex is now, right?" The alien didn't seem impressed. "Yes? And you'll surrender everything unless you want to be arrested immediately." Teslan paused, thinking for a moment. He'd read somewhere that the Galactic Empire was a huge bureaucracy, bogged down by endless red tape. If there was one thing Teslan knew, it was how to take advantage of bureaucratic systems. "I'll tell you what," he said, the idea clicking into place. "I'll cooperate. But I want to talk to your legal team first. I think we can work out an arrangement." The alien narrowed its eyes. "There will be no arrangement. You will comply, or you will face the full force of the law." Teslan sat up straight, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Oh no. I'm going to need more than just a task force. If I'm going down, you're going down with me." A week later, the galaxy was abuzz with unexpected news. Teslan Spuskex had filed an appeal, one that the Galactic Empire had never seen before. It wasn't a request for leniency or a plea for mercy. It was a technicality. A loophole so ridiculous that it made everyone stop and reconsider just how deep the bureaucratic hole could go. Teslan had ascended to minor ruler status. The law stated that anyone who violated Galactic Regulation 477 had to be given a title of nobility before they could be formally tried. And in one stroke, Teslan had maneuvered around the system, naming himself the ruler of the planet Mars. It was an absurdity, but it was enough. Of course, the Galactic Empire didn't take kindly to this. The legal team scrambled, unable to find a way to resolve the issue, but Teslan wasn't finished yet. In the coming weeks, he would launch a series of bureaucratic assaults on the Empire, filing endless appeals and petitions, using outdated legal language to throw them off track. The result? A near constant stream of paperwork that flooded the Galactic Council's inboxes. At the same time, Teslan launched what he called the Mars Independence Movement, an online campaign with the goal of making Mars a sovereign empire. A meme-based political movement spread like wildfire, and soon, Teslan found himself surrounded by passionate followers from oppressed planets, who saw him as a symbol of freedom. While the Department of Galactic Empires scrambled to figure out how to stop him, Teslan made more moves. He declared war, then peace, and even held a galactic IPO, all in a single week. His followers cheered, their voices swelling in the digital space. The Galactic Council, now on the verge of losing control, issued a decree. Teslan Space X must appear before them for trial. But Teslan wasn't worried. Not even a little. He had something that no one had seen coming. A legal team made entirely of AI lawyers, an entire army of algorithms designed to bend the law to his will. He even built a robot judge himself to oversee the trial. The idea was simple: overwhelm the system with an avalanche of legal filings, and so the trial began. The Galactic Council sat in their grand chamber, preparing for the battle ahead. The courtroom was silent as Teslan Space walked in, his robot judge trailing behind him. His AI lawyers stood in a line, ready to fire off counterclaims at a moment's notice. The trial didn't last long. The system began to slow down as the counterclaims piled up, one after another. In the end, the Galactic Council's server infrastructure couldn't handle the weight of 1.4 trillion counterclaims. The verdict came down. Teslan Space legally owned 17% of the galaxy. He celebrated by selling it as NFTs. And all of it started with a rocket, an outdated law, and the most absurd bureaucratic loophole the galaxy had ever seen. As he sold his share of the galaxy, Teslan leaned back in his chair, smiling. All I wanted was good Wi-Fi. Give me a form. I need a form to process the form. It had been months since Teslan Space had secured his spot as a minor ruler of Mars, but his thirst for chaos, no, innovation, had only just begun. The paperwork war was now in full swing, and the galaxy's top bureaucrats were beginning to understand the true meaning of his legal assault. The Galactic Empire's most experienced agents were being pulled into the mess one by one. It started with the Department of Galactic Empires, DGE, but soon enough, every corner of the Empire felt the tremors of Space's paperwork crusade. The more they fought, the deeper the hole Teslan had dug grew. Teslan's latest stunt? A galactic survey campaign. But not just any survey. A survey designed to grant self-determination to every single planet in the galaxy, at least those that felt oppressed by the Empire. You're going to declare every single planet its own sovereign nation? His communications officer, Kex, asked, raising an eyebrow. Why not? Everyone loves a revolution, don't they? Teslan replied, chuckling. Besides, every planet's got a legal system, Kex. We just need the right paperwork to make it official. And just like that, every planet in the galaxy that had been quietly overlooked or kept under Empire control was suddenly submitting forms, each one declaring their independence from the Galactic Empire. Mars was now the beacon of hope for oppressed worlds, and the tidal wave of signatures only grew with each passing day. The DGE had their hands full. Galactic officials were scrambling, trying to process the paperwork, trying to figure out how. One man had turned a farce into a global phenomenon. Teslan had found his niche. He exploited every loophole he could find, filing endless petitions, challenging outdated clauses, and demanding that the Empire accept a new system of governance. The problem? The Galactic Empire had one major flaw. It was slow. Slower than the slowest moving star in the system, slower than the bureaucrats who spent their time filling out forms they would never read. Teslan, on the other hand, wasn't just fast. He was fast and clever. Every form he filled out had a purpose. Each application, a calculated move. He became a symbol of revolt in the eyes of the oppressed, a figurehead of chaos that the Empire couldn't seem to defeat. As Teslan's meme-driven Mars independence movement continued to grow, so did his fan base. Everywhere, people rallied around the cause of freedom, freedom through paperwork. It became a cultural phenomenon. Teslan's name spread far and wide, reaching planets that had no idea they even had a legal system to begin with. The DGE wasn't blind to this. In fact, they were watching with growing concern. The Galactic Council had already issued a decree: Teslan must be brought to trial. A trial so grand, so important, that it would settle the issue once and for all. Was the Galactic Empire truly as powerful as it claimed to be? Or had one man, armed only with paperwork and a dubious legal mind, managed to outwit them all? The trial was set to take place on a neutral planet, a location neither under Empire control nor Spusx's. The Galactic Council's top judges, lawyers, and legal experts assembled in the vast courtroom. They had prepared for this moment, gathering evidence, creating strategies, and plotting counterattacks to nullify Spusx's claims. They underestimated one thing. Teslan Spusx was always a step ahead. The trial began with a grand procession. The Galactic Council members filed into the chamber, sitting in their towering thrones. Above them, holographic images of planets, star systems, and entire regions of the galaxy floated, each symbolizing their domain. The vastness of the Empire was on display. Teslan entered the room alone, but not without fanfare. His AI lawyers, programmed with centuries of legal knowledge, stood at attention behind him. He was dressed in a sharp suit that screamed business, but there was something about the way he walked that suggested this was all just another day at the office. "I assume you've prepared the necessary documentation for today's hearing." One of the judges, a broad-skinned alien named Ilgazar, asked from the bench. "Oh, absolutely," Teslan said with a grin. "I've got everything we'll need to make this an interesting day." Ilgazar raised an eyebrow. "We'll see about that." Proceedings began, and the courtroom was filled with the sound of scrolling documents, clicking data pads, and the murmurs of legal experts scanning through piles of paperwork. Teslan, with his ever-present grin, didn't seem to care much about the formality of it all. His legal team, however, was all business. They filed claim after counterclaim, each more ridiculous than the last. By mid-afternoon, the Galactic Council was starting to look strained. They had just finished reviewing an unprecedented number of counterclaims when Teslan's AI lawyer, the one named Zethar, presented a new motion: the galactic tax exemption for small empires and sovereign states. What is this? One of the judges, a massive being with 4 arms, demanded, clearly frustrated. "You can't possibly be suggesting, 'Oh, but I am,'" Teslan interrupted with a smile. "You see, under this act, Mars qualifies for complete tax exemption, all due taxes. To the Galactic Empire will be void. As a minor ruler, I am entitled to these exemptions." The court erupted into chaos. The legal experts scrambled to interpret the law, while Teslan calmly sipped from a cup of tea. He had known about this clause for years, but it was only now, in the heat of this trial, that he was using it to its full advantage. Zethar didn't let up. Also, the AI lawyer continued, as per Galactic Law 1300, subsection 22, paragraph 7, Teslan Spusx is entitled to declare war on any galactic body. Considering the hostile nature of the Galactic Empire's tactics, Mars has every right to declare itself free of Empire control. One of the galactic judges, a small creature who resembled a walking jellyfish, floated nervously in his seat. "This is an abuse of the legal system." "Not at all," Teslan replied. "It's simply a creative interpretation of the law, and if you want to challenge it, you'll need to do so in writing. In triplicate, no exceptions." It was working. The Galactic Empire's legal system was crumbling under the weight of Spusx's paperwork. The Galactic Council had no choice but to give him more time to present his claims, and every time they tried to shut him down, Teslan would find another law, another clause to exploit. Days passed. The trial turned into an exhausting battle of paperwork, claims, and counterclaims. Teslan was relentless. His team filed endless appeals, creating an ever-growing pile of paperwork that no one could keep up with. Then came the unexpected twist. Teslan didn't just file for tax exemptions or rights to self-determination. No, he had something far more ambitious in mind. He declared himself the rightful owner of several core systems in the galaxy. And through a technicality in the galactic deed system, he had acquired legal titles to those systems. The Empire was on the brink of collapse. The The Galactic Council convened one last time, their voices echoing in the courtroom. Spusk X, one of the judges began, his voice shaking. You are forcing us into a corner. There is no way out. Your claims, Teslan's smile widened. I believe we're done here. And just like that, the system crashed. It was impossible to handle the weight of 1 trillion counterclaims, millions of petitions, and the complex web of legal maneuvers Teslan had set into motion. The verdict came down hours later. Teslan Spusk X, through paperwork alone, had acquired 17% of the galaxy, and he was about to sell it off as NFTs. The galaxy watched with bated breath. Teslan Spusk X, the man who had taken the Galactic Empire to its knees using nothing more than legal loopholes, had finally emerged victorious. His ownership of 17% of the galaxy was a fact now, a certified truth recorded in the annals of galactic history. His victory was an absurdity. It was also a reminder of how vulnerable a system could be when it was mired in its own bureaucracy. Now came the final move. The Galactic Empire, humbled by paperwork, tried to close ranks, attempting to regain some form of control over their fractured systems. But they couldn't. They could not bring themselves to fight what had already been legally decided. What did the Empire do when their most powerful weapon, control, was taken away by forms, signatures, and submissions? Teslan knew they would try something. They always tried to do something. The might of the Empire would never accept the situation. But Teslan had anticipated that. In fact, he had been counting on it. He sat comfortably in his private office aboard the Spusk X Mariner, a ship designed to handle intergalactic business, paperwork, and stunts. The sleek, futuristic design was punctuated by stacks of forms and datapads strewn about, a chaotic reflection of his legal empire. A small, satisfied smirk tugged at his lips as he watched the digital news feeds. The galaxy was in upheaval. He could feel the tension building. He could hear the low rumblings of unease coming from every corner of the empire. The news had spread like wildfire. Teslan had secured legal control of vast sections of the galaxy, and now he was about to monetize it, declare war, peace, or an IPO. All in 1 week? Keck said as he walked into the room, carrying a coffee cup that looked oddly out of place in the high-tech environment. You sure that's the way to do this? Teslan chuckled, eyes still locked on the hollow screen. You've got to keep them guessing, Kex. You know how it is. You make one move, and they start to think they can predict you, but no one can predict a galactic IPO. And what if they do start predicting you? Kex asked, raising an eyebrow. Teslan's eyes flicked over to his friend, the corner of his mouth, twitching upward. Then I'll just submit an appeal. I'll challenge the concept of prediction itself. I'm sure there's a law against it somewhere. Kex shook his head with a smirk, taking a seat across from him. You're unbelievable. Maybe, Teslan said with a shrug. But here's the thing, Kex. I didn't start this to change the galaxy. I started this because, well, it was fun. The most entertaining thing about all this bureaucracy is watching them squirm. I didn't want to be emperor of the galaxy. That wasn't my goal. All I wanted was good Wi-Fi. Kex snorted. Good Wi-Fi? Teslan nodded, grinning. That's right. For too long, the Empire has hoarded the best tech, the best bandwidth, the most reliable systems. You can't even stream a good movie without your connection dropping in half the galaxy. But now, now I control 17% of the galaxy. If you want a connection to Mars, you're going to need to pay my rates. And those rates are going to be higher than anything the Empire can manage. No more lag, no more buffering. It was ridiculous. It was absurd. But it was genius. Teslan leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling as he surveyed the situation. He had done the impossible, and now he was going to sell it to the highest bidder. The announcement came a day later. Teslan Spusk X, now legally, recognized as the ruler of 17% of the galaxy, had decided to sell it off piece by piece through non-fungible tokens, NFTs. The press release was brief but effective. In light of my legal victories, I am now offering exclusive ownership of the following star systems, planets, and resources in perpetuity. By acquiring one of these NFTs, you will legally own a piece of the galaxy, Please read the terms and conditions carefully, as some planets have very specific laws regarding ownership, but trust me, it's all in the fine print. Within hours, Teslon's NFTs were all the rage. Investors, opportunists, and even the casual wealthy began snapping them up. The virtual marketplace was alive with transactions, each one more ludicrous than the last. People were buying and selling entire solar systems like they were rare trading cards. Teslon had created a new form of commerce, one that thrived on absurdity, speed, and legal chaos. The Galactic Empire watched in horror as more and more systems were bought up. A small but significant part of the galaxy was now, legally, under the control of private citizens. Wealthy corporations began to establish their own sovereign planets, complete with security forces, currencies, and, most importantly, unrestricted access to the newly constructed Space Orcs Wi-Fi network. The Galactic Council, desperate to regain control, attempted to issue a decree. They argued that Teslon's NFTs were illegal under Galactic Law 3300, Section 12, Clause 7. The ruling was immediate and expected. Teslon's response? I've already filed an appeal, and I've attached a petition for an extension on your ruling. It's not my fault that your legal system is so outdated. Maybe you should consider updating it, but I can help with that too. Just send me a form, and I'll have a lawyer fill it out for you. The Galactic Empire had no choice but to sit back, helpless as the digital landscape shifted around them. Teslon Space Orcs had not only outsmarted them, he had transformed the entire structure of the galaxy. He was a king, not by force or violence, but by cleverness, legal tactics, and a willingness to bend, break, and redefine the rules. The closing line of his press release summed it all up perfectly. All I wanted was good Wi-Fi. Months passed. The dust of the trial had settled, but its effects were still being felt. Teslon Space Orcs had successfully dismantled the hold of the Galactic Empire over vast portions of the galaxy. With his own network of planets, resources, and even political allegiances, he had created a new form of governance, one that thrived not on might, but on paper. The Empire? It had learned a hard lesson. It had learned that no system, no matter how vast or powerful, was immune to the corrosive influence of paperwork. The galaxy would never be the same. But as for Teslon, he remained on top, sitting comfortably in his chair, sipping his tea. Life was good. For Teslon Space Orcs, the victory was sweet, but it was only the beginning. Next, he said with a grin, we take over the galactic coffee supply chain. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.